In the last lecture module, we looked at the facts of the case in the baby Teresa example. Then we looked at an argument that Rachel presents in favor of harvesting baby Teresa's organs for transplant to help other children. In this module, we want to look at the other two arguments that Rachel presents. And both of these arguments are going to be arguments against harvesting baby Teresa's organs and using them to help other children. Now, the first argument that we're going to look at is called the argument that we should not use people as means. And this argument, like that first argument, the benefits argument, starts off with an assumption of a general principle to regulate our behavior. This time the principle is it's wrong to violate a person's autonomy. So what is autonomy in the context of this argument? Rachel tells us in the context of this argument, we can think of autonomy as a person's ability to make decisions about how to conduct their lives based upon their beliefs, their desires, and their values. So to violate someone's autonomy is to prevent them from making decisions about how to conduct their lives based on beliefs, on desires, and on values. Rachel tells us there are several ways that you can do that. You can trick a person, lie to a person, or you can force a person, and so on. But in all of these cases, you are preventing them from making decisions about how to conduct their life by preventing them from making decisions based on their beliefs, their values, or their desires. Second premise is using baby Teresa for her organs violates her autonomy. So this is again presented as a factual statement about that case. Therefore, it concludes we ought not transplant the organs. Rachel gives an evaluation of this argument, and he evaluates this argument as being unsound. It either has one or more false premises, or the conclusion isn't guaranteed by the truth of the premises here. And in specific, what Rachel suggests is that by taking baby Teresa's organs, we don't thwart her autonomy because she has no autonomy. She can't make decisions, she has no desires, and she cannot value anything. So the idea here is that it looks like that second premise in this argument, using Teresa for her organs violates her autonomy, is in fact judged by Rachel to be false premise. It's false, he thinks, because baby Teresa isn't capable of having autonomy. She doesn't have beliefs, she doesn't have desires, she doesn't have values, she's incapable of making decisions. And so as a result, we can't violate her autonomy because she has none. Let's turn now to the second argument that Rachel forwards against the idea of harvesting baby Teresa's organs. The argument from the wrongness of killing. As before, the argument from the wrongness of killing begins by making an assumption about a principle that would regulate or guide our actions. It is always wrong to kill a person. To use Teresa's organs, she must be killed. So again, we have a statement about the facts of the case, or at least purported facts of the case. Therefore, we ought not to transplant the organs. This argument, like the other two arguments, comes to that conclusion that we ought not to transplant the organs. Now, Rachel evaluates this argument as possibly unsound. He says it's not completely clear whether or not the argument is sound. And the reason why is that Rachel isn't sure that baby Teresa counts as a person, and killing baby Teresa counts as a violation of this principle. So he says that baby Teresa is not conscious, she will never have a life, she's going to die soon, and taking her organs would help other babies. He thinks that all of these are good reasons for us to consider whether or not our criterion for what counts as killing a person really does or maybe should apply to baby Teresa in this case. And one of the things that he notices about this is that our criterion for what counts as killing a person has changed in the past. So he notes this shift from a criterion for death having to do with the heart stopping to a criterion of death having to do with the brain being dead. And he notes that this criterion was changed, at least in part, because of the breakthrough that allowed heart transplants, and the fact that if you have that criterion death occurs, when the heart stops, you have a much worse chance of being able to harvest an organ, specifically a heart, for the purposes of transplant. So what Rachel's is kind of suggesting here is that if we have good reasons not to characterize somebody as a person, and he thinks they do have good reasons in the baby Teresa case, then it's not clear that we're actually violating this first principle. And so that quote from page 5 gives us a sort of summary of the reasons why he thinks that it looks at least questionable whether or not that first premise is violated, as is alleged in the second premise there. At this point, it should become clear that a pattern is starting to emerge in the treatment of these cases. We get arguments for and against, and the arguments have a very similar pattern to one another. They start with a principle. They assume a principle to guide our conduct, a rule. Then they state some relevant facts about the case that are applicable given the rule, and then they draw a conclusion about the case based on the combination of the principle and the rule. In the next lecture module, we'll turn our attention to the second case that Rachel considers, the case of Jody and Mary.